This is chapter number 8, Civilizing the Native and Educating the Nation. This means native, we are talking about Indians, educating the Indians, civilizing the Indians. So the question arises that whatever we have seen in British rule, it was around 200 plus. From 1750 you can start, and from 200 plus years, the Rajas, Nawabs, how do they got affected by British rule? We talked about that. We talked about the farmers, the peasants, how they got affected in this British rule, or what are the effects, and the tribals, the Adivasis, the Janjatis. But what happened to their education? Shiksha. What happened to the lives of the students at this time? We need to know this also. Because they have, first they came for trade, then they said, we are here to rule you. Then they ruled. And then they also thought one thing, that we are not only for trading and rule, we are here on a cultural mission. That is, this is a Sanskritic mission. This is our duty to civilize the natives of this country, to civilize the indigenous people of this country, this subcontinent, because they are already civilized. British and Europeans are already civilized. They need to change the customs and values, riti rivaj, manyatai, whatever we were following at that time, whatever we had in terms of thoughts, in terms of opinions, in terms of the religion. So what changes did they introduced? How do they wanted to civilize, and how did they work to civilize us? And they called us good subjects. Good subjects means we were not humans, we were subjects. They were our malik, they were our guardians, they were our, say, the rulers. Okay? So this is how they thought. What is the perspective? In British perspective, what was the education? How did the British saw the education? Because they have seen education, or they thought education with the European perspective. In 200 years of that span, what we have seen here is, whenever we have a kid, whenever he goes to school, he'll go, there will be a van, and or you can also take him to the school. From 8 to 3 he's going to study, and then he'll come back, he'll go to the tuition, or you will teach him, and then he will do some homework, then he'll do some TV, watch some TV, and then this circle will repeat. So this is what you have seen now. In between you give exam, in between you go for assignment. There are so many things happening in this school time. So what we are seeing today, this kind of culture, this kind of education, Christian school, public school, the government school, the Kendriya Vidyalayas, the Navodaya Vidyalayas. So all these parivartan, all these changes, how Indians reacted, how the British forced or easily paced these changes, and how Indians were educated. The tradition of Orientalism. First, let me tell you about Orientalism. Who were Orientalist people? This in Hindi is called as Pracyavadi. Those people with a mindset that they respect their culture and their language. Along with this, they also respect others' culture and the values and the opinions. Indian languages, Indian culture, you can call it as the Indian languages, Sanskrit, Hindi, the Arabi, and at that time the Persian, Farsi was used, because it was just after Mughal, these Britishers have came. Arabic, all these languages, the culture related to all these languages, they were respecting it, and they wanted to propagate it, to strengthen it. These were called as Orientalism. The person who is going to come, we'll talk about him. He is William Jones. He was a linguist. Linguist means an individual who knows and who studies various languages, several languages. So linguist is Bhashavid, the master of various languages. So we are starting with 1783. What happened? William Jones. This man, both of the pictures are of him only. William Jones, he arrived in Calcutta, Bengal. So he came to Calcutta on the post of junior judge at Supreme Court. You know the Regulating Act, because of this Supreme Court was established. So he came as a junior judge, and this Supreme Court was set up by company. So William Jones, he was a great linguist, Bhashavid. That means he was knowing so many languages. He learned Greek and Latin at Oxford. It's a very big university. Greek, Latin, then French and English. Also, he learned Arabic from a friend. Persian, he is also learning Persian. In this picture also, he is seen learning Persian. So he was knowing various languages. So he also started spending so much hours or many hours with Pandits. And Pandits, we know Pandits, the Brahmins, they are the master of the Sanskrit language. So he was also learning from Pandits the Sanskrit language, the intricacies of Sanskrit language, the grammar, the poetry in Sanskrit. So basically, in a short span of time, he was studying about, or he started studying about, the ancient Indian text and the Prachin Indian text, ancient Indian text related to law, related to philosophy, related to religion, related to politics, even the morality, mathematics, that is arithmetic, algebra, arithmetic, and also medicine. And there are various other sciences William Jones started reading, and all these with the perspective of ancient Indian text, whatever Indian text has given us, whatever is written at that time. All these he wanted to learn, and he learned. He wanted to learn, he wanted to understand. Now, William Jones, we saw him that he discovered something. He saw that this is not only my interest. My interest is shared by various British officials who are staying or living or working in Calcutta. So his idea, his thought, his interest are common with various other people. And at that same time, there are two Englishmen notably. First name is very big name, Henry Thomas Colebrook. We'll call him as Colebrook. And the other person is Nathaniel Halhed. Nathaniel Halhed. So these two English gentlemen, they were quite busy in trying to find out the ancient Indian heritage, culture, Indian text. So they were interested in it, and they were doing work of discovering these all heritage which India had. And they were also doing one more thing. They were translating Sanskrit and Persian work into English. They were doing different work, but they were translating also the Sanskrit and Persian work, ancient work, into England, this English language. Halhed, if you remember, he has written law. The court, first of all, when it was there, when the district magistrate was first established, so the laws were different for different states. So there was a common law being made, and he translated it for English so that English judge can understand. Halhed. So now Henry Thomas Colebrook and Nathaniel Halhed, and the initiative was from William Jones. So now William Jones and all these people, what they did, they combinedly, they set up the Asiatic Society of Bengal. In picture also you see, this is the Royal Asiatic Society of Bengal, and who established it? These gentlemen. The basic one was William Jones. On his initiative, this was being set up. So basically it was about all the Indian culture, heritage, all the different books and different, the Sahitya, it was there. And they also started a journal, and that journal was called as Asiatic Researches. So first thing, they set up this society, and also they started printing a journal called Asiatic Researches. Now Jones and Colebrook, now they have a very peculiar attitude towards India. They had a great respect for Indian ancient culture, not only for India, also for the West. That is Indian culture, West culture. They both have a deep respect, deep honor for these cultures. So they thought, and they said that Indian civilization attained the glory, the peak of the glory, that the highest, you can say the zenith of the glory. But because of certain reason, subsequently it declined, it came down. So they respected Indian glory, Indian culture, they honored it. So in order to understand India or any country, they said it is very necessary to understand the sacred and legal texts and to discover and to learn them, to understand them. This is Jones and Colebrook idea was. If you want to understand country, you need to know about the sacred and legal text of the ancient period. And if you see in India, we have basically that time also 14%, right now we have Muslims and around 81% Hindu. So Hindu and Muslims, the ideas and laws of the Hindus and Muslims can only be learned when we discover the sacred and legal text and understand them and learn them. And then only we can have a basis of development in India. That is, they are there to develop. They are on a cultural mission. So they want this to develop India. Okay. Now, Jones and Colebrook, because they were understanding their meaning of ancient text, they're actually discovering them and trying to understand them and even translating them. As I said, these two, and along with Hellhead, they were translating them as well. Now, why they were doing this project? The project was, first says that the British people will understand the Indian culture. That is why we are discovering this project, is just because we want British to know about Indian culture. So British, when they will learn about Indian culture, they will be able to govern this country. And also the Indians, they will rediscover their own heritage. They will learn about the glory. They will learn about their past. So there are two things. Why were they doing is, the project reason was that Britishers as well as the Indians will know what they were, what they had, and the glory they had. Okay. So these all will be known. And now, how this will help them? This will help them, the Britishers, to be two things: guardians also and masters also. That is, they will become the guardians and the masters of the Indian culture, Indian people, right? So this was their basis of that project. So many officials, they also said, they argued that this Indian way of learning, Indian culture, Indian text, we need to propagate or promote it. The Western learning is not fit for Indian, the subcontinent. This is only, we call it as Orientalism. This is Orientalist. Okay. That is how they force, or they argued that we need to encourage the establishment of institution where people can study and the British can study the ancient Indian text, and also teach Sanskrit and also Persian literature and poetry. So Sanskrit and Persian, all the literature and poetry, if Hindu and Muslims are taught their culture, their text, their language, then they are familiar with it. So they will start valuing it and treasuring it. They will think that we are learning and we are reading the same thing which we are and which we are supposed to do, rather than giving them a different word, different language, and altogether different perspective. Okay, and that is how we can make a part or a place in the hearts of the Indians, the hearts of the native. This is how. So when this discussion took place and this promotion took place, actually it happened. The institution was established. It was Colebrook, it was William Jones, Harry Head. So in Calcutta, there was a madrasa which was being set up, and this happened in 1781. In 1781, in Calcutta, a madrasa was being established, and this madrasa was for the study of Arabic, the Persian and Islamic law. The Arabic, the Persian and the Islamic law. And not only the madrasa, there was a Hindu college in Banaras. So in 1791, a Hindu college, especially for the Sanskrit literature, Sanskrit text, it was being established in 1791. And basically it was a Sanskrit college. Learning of ancient Sanskrit text, and also this will help in the proper administration of this country. So because of the effort which started with William Jones, held by Colebrook and others, that is how this institution came up. But the thing was, there were various other officials also. They were against the idea of Orientalist, Pracyavadi Soch. They were against it. They were very critical about it. And what was the idea of the critics? The first person I'll talk about is James Mill. Then I'll come to the second one, Thomas Babington Macaulay. So we'll start with James Mill first, and they all were the critics of Orientalism. I'm talking about early 1800 plus. So various British officials, BO, they were very critical, quite critical about the Orientalist vision of learning. They were saying that the East, because England is here, Europe is here, Arab is here, India is here. So this Indian Arabs comes to the east of these countries. So they were saying that the knowledge of the East is whatever literature, ancient texts were there in India and Arab. They were saying they are full of errors and unscientific. There is no science involved. They are full with errors. It was written non-seriously, and it was very light-hearted. Okay, there was no effort put in, no scientific thought. So now it is very wrong. They were saying, these critics were saying, why you are wasting money on these madrasas and this Banaras college, or the study of Arabic and Sanskrit language and literature? Don't put your money or waste your money in this. There is no use, because Eastern culture is full of errors. So the first person which came, I would like to highlight, is James Mill. James Mill was the first to attack the Orientalist, and he said that why are we trying to do these things? We don't want them to win a place in. We don't want a place in their heart. That is why we are teaching them what they wanted. We will teach them what we wanted. So the aim of education, according to James Mill, is the education should be useful and practical. That is, Indians should first be made familiar with these scientific and technical advances. Whatever has happened in West, scientifically and technically, the Indians should learn that. And this is our duty to let them learn that, or allow them to learn that. So when they will learn this, when they will go for Western learning, then they will know the poetry and sacred literature. Okay. But the poetry and sacred literature of Orients or Orientalists, this is not good. This is what James Mill said. Now after that, there is one more person came, and he was more critical than James Mill. By 1830s, the attack became very stronger and sharper. And the most important and outspoken influential person was Thomas Babington Macaulay, the person after James Mill who attacked these Orientalist thoughts were Thomas Babington Macaulay. He is Thomas Babington Macaulay. So he was very mukhar. So he said that India is asabhya. It's an uncivilized country, barbar country. We need to civilize it. This is our duty to civilize them. Okay. So he said that if we take our library, only one shelf, one part of the shelf, this will contain all the content of Indian and Arabic literature. That is, there is no strength, there is no valor, there is no power of any literature of India or Arabs. So what you are making, wasting money or public money in promoting this Oriental learning, that is madrasas and all these Banaras college, he clearly said that we need to put English at most top, and we need to make this as the medium of teaching English language. When Indians will know English, they will be able to read the finest, the best literature that the West or the world has produced. Only then they will be able to learn. By Sanskrit, Hindi, they won't be able to learn. Okay? And they will be aware of, Indians will be aware of, what are the developments in Western science and philosophy. Also, we will be able to change the taste of the people, will change, will civilize the people, and the values and the culture we will be able to change through English, through Western learning. So Macaulay actually put down all these minutes, and because of Macaulay's minute, because he was influential, high-powered, ranked, so English Education Act of 1835 was introduced. The decision was English is now the medium of instruction for higher education. For all the higher education, the English Education Act of 1835, which was based on Macaulay's minute, was saying that English will be the medium. English will be the medium. And the promotion of these Oriental institution like the Calcutta's Madrasa or Banaras Sanskrit College, they will be stopped. According to them, according to Macaulay, these places, these institutions are the temples of darkness. There is only darkness there. And I also said, because of this, the textbook were being published in English. Okay? So there are certain things I need to tell you. First thing is Orientalist. Those people who have good knowledge of their language and culture of Asia. So those all have the culture, knowledge of Asia are Orientalist. Munshi is a person who can read, write and teach Persian, Farsi. Vernacular means apart from English, whatever language is there. It can be any language. Sanskrit, Arabic, Persian, all these languages they called as vernacular languages. Vernacular, right? So this is vernacular. So these are the words being used here, and sometimes they are asked also. So it's my duty to tell you. Here is a picture. This is a monument of Warren Hastings. You have to tell me who was Warren Hastings. Was he the first Governor General or Viceroy? You have to tell me. Okay. So Warren Hastings, and this is 1830. This is at Victoria Memorial in Calcutta, and Warren Hastings was one of the key figure because he was the supporter of Orientalist. So you have to tell me who is Warren Hastings, and he is standing in the middle. Left you see here is a Pandit. Right you see a Munshi Persian scholar. So all these were being shown just because of the Orientalism approach. So they were talking about all the languages. And Warren Hastings is believed that his initiative, because of his initiative, Calcutta Madrasa was being set up. Because they all believe in the culture and respect other cultures also. Education for commerce, Vanijya. These stories start like this. the name of this gentleman, Charles Wood. He is going to come. So what happened? This is East India Company, say London office, or England office, say head office. Here is East India Company, India, Indian subcontinent. So the court of directors of East India Company in London of England, they sent a dispatch, an educational dispatch, a letter, say, bunch of documents. Where? To the Governor General in India. To Governor General in India. Now, Charles Wood, he was the president of the board of control of the company in India, means he was taking care of the East India Company, president of the board of control. And he issued this educational dispatch, this document, or this policy, right? Because he was a president. So that is how the thing which was decided in England was sent to India and it was issued by Charles Wood. That is why it is called as Wood's dispatch. This word, this phrase is going to come again and again. Wood's dispatch. So this was a nirdesh, this was a policy, this was an indicator. Now the educational policy, this Wood's dispatch was talking about the educational policy. It emphasized, it told that what is going to be the faida, practical benefits of the European learning. Because Europe, still before Brexit, England was a part of European Union only. So the European learning, what is the practical benefits to the Indian, for the Indian, because of this Wood dispatch which had the educational policy, this was written here. So one was economic. What was the economic benefit? It will enable the Indians to know, to recognize, to understand the advantages of expansion of trade and commerce. That is, what is the significance of trade, what is the importance of commerce, and why the expansion of these two is important, the Indians will know. One more thing this Wood's dispatch will contain was the resources. That the resources of a country, it can be minerals, it can be forest, it can be various other things. So how these resources are important for developing the country or development of the country. This was also written here. And also, when we introduce this kind of, or this way of learning, European ways of life, this will change the thoughts, opinion, taste, desire of Indians. When the European learning, people opinion will change, their desire will change, their ichhai will change. That is, for example, we go now for Puma, Adidas and Nike. These shoes we take because we have a desire, we have developed a taste. So this will create a demand of British goods. When the Indians will be told that this is the way, this is the thing, this is the requirement, this is the goods we have. So now the British goods requirement or the demand will increase amongst the Indian. Now Indians would only buy these things, appreciate these things, buy these things, spend money on this. So it's a kind of trade and commerce only. So whatever is produced in Europe, India will become a very big market, huge market for it. There is one more thing. First thing is, this Wood dispatch, because European learning was emphasized, it will improve the moral character of Indians. For example, if you find some money on the road, what will you do? You will just take it and keep it in your pocket, or you will search whose money is this. That will show your moral character. That is how good you are, what kind of upbringing you have. That is, are you truthful? Are you honest to yourself, to your Almighty? What you have learned, that thing only you will show. So when we will improve the moral character, the truthful and honesty will increase, and now the company will by themselves get civil servants who can be trusted upon, who can be depended upon. Because if Indians are taken just like that, on Indian knowledge, they will not be truthful, honest, they will not be dependable, they cannot be trusted. This is what they say. So it was clearly written and it was mentioned that in East, Arab come, India come. So Indian subcontinent and Arab, they are both counting to East. So they have already emphasized, the Englishmen, that this literature, Sahitya of East have lot of errors. It has grave errors. So if this East learning is done, people will not have the sense of duty. They will not be committed to their work. And they will not, this Eastern or this Sanskrit, Arabic or Persian learning, they will not be able to develop these skills which are required for the administration. Because we need administrators, we need IAS, we need PCS, we need the ICS. At that time, it was called as Indian Civil Service, ICS. Okay? So this is how this importance of European learning was emphasized. So since 1854, I just said, this Wood Dispatch, by the time it came, several measures were taken by the British government. Okay? At that time, 1850, following this 1854, first thing, in order to hold or control all the matters regarding education, educational departments were set up. Educational departments were set up because they wanted to control all the matters which are related to education. And also they took this step for university education, Vishwavidyalaya Shiksha, university education. And in 1857, just after 3 years, when the sepoys of Meerut and Delhi, they were revolting, at the same time, there were universities being set up. The universities being established in Calcutta, in Madras, in Bombay, and they also did a lot of work, that is, they tried to change the school education, the system of school education also. SE, I'm writing for that. Okay. So I'll show you a picture of Bombay University in the 19th century. You see how this building also shows the UK or British sculpture or the building making. Okay, I have to show you a picture before we talk about what content we have here. These two pictures are same, one is colored. So this is on the banks of the Hooghly River, Calcutta. This is Serampur College, also the Baptist Mission Press in Calcutta, India. So what is the story here? This person is called William Carey. William Carey, he was a Scottish missionary. Missionaries are those who propagates or promotes their religion. So now he was the person who initiated and he helped in establishing the Serampur mission. This Serampur mission which you see here. Okay. So what happened at that time was the missionaries, they thought that the idea of education or the importance of education is to improve the moral character of people. At the way we talked about truthfulness, honesty and modesty, love for others, kindness, cooperation, all these moral character of people. And this can only be improved through Christian education. Christian education. If you go to the Western countries now, you will see Salvation Army, you will see food banks. So Christians are actually doing for people who are destitutes or who are homeless. So Christian, they really do, because in their religion it is being said, like the Sikh, like the Muslims, they do. In Muslims, you have to give 10% of your amount. Okay. So until 1830, the East India Company, they were opposing the missionary activity. Why they were opposing this missionary activity, that is the propagation, promotion of the religion? Because they were fearful that their presence will be looked with suspicious eyes. People will think that these people have come here to make us Christian. That is, they are on religious venture rather than coming for trade or rather than coming for any other purpose. So they will get suspicious. So they were not promoting or they were opposing these missionary activities until 1830. Okay. So William Carey and others, they wanted to set up a mission. How can they set up? Because in British controlled territories, they cannot set up. They were being opposed. They were not given chance. So this is the Sirampur, and they established this missionary or the mission at Sirampur because this was the East India Company under the control of Danish. This was the Denmark East India Company. Denmark is also a Christian country. So and they also had a printing press in 1800, and then also they established a college in 1818. All right. So what happened after that? Over the 19th century, the missionary schools were set up all over the country, all over the subcontinent. And after 1857, after the big revolt of 1857, 1857 के विद्रोह के बाद, the British now, because British government has taken control from East India Company now, they were also reluctant. They were also opposing that, if we support this missionary kind of education, then what will happen? Because any custom, practice, belief, religious ideas, if we just tickle it, the native will again rise. Something like this, what happened with the cartridge, that people thought that it is made up of the cow and pig grease or the fat. So it was the revolt. So the British government was very reluctant, very fearful, and they don't want anything to happen like this again. So the custom practices, belief, religious ideas of the natives, of the Indian, they don't want to even touch it, because this will be against, that will be a chingari, that will be a spark to anything big. Now I'll talk about William Adam. William Adam, he was Scottish. So let me tell you, this Scottish and this Englishmen, all Englishmen, we are talking about Britishers are Scottish and the England people. So 1830, what happened? This person, William Adam, he was a Scottish missionary. And he was a Scottish missionary and he toured. He was from Scotland and he toured different districts of Bengal and Bihar. Now, why he was traveling, why he was touring? Because he was being asked by the East India Company to report on the progress of education in vernacular schools. Vernacular schools means any language other than the English were called as vernacular. So the schools where Hindi was taught or Sanskrit or Arabic or Farsi, what is the progress of this education in elementary school, vernacular school? The report, what is happening, was asked by East India Company, and the person responsible was William Adam. So William Adam, that is why he toured all these Bengal and Bihar, right? So what Adam found, because he was touring each and every nook and corner now. So his report is quite interesting. In his report, he found that over 1 lakh pathshalas, like school we have, at that time it was called as pathshalas, and there are over 1 lakh pathshalas in Bengal and Bihar, and these are very small institutions, and in one institution there is around 20 students. So total number will be what? 20 students, 1 lakh pathshalas, one pathshala, 20 students. So it will be around 20 lakh students. They are studying in pathshala, and at that time it is a huge number, 20 lakh at that time. Okay, our population was around 30, 35, 40 crores, I guess. So 20 lakh were only studying in pathshalas, and these pathshalas were set up by either the wealthy people, the rich people, or the local community. Sometimes there are schools which are being set up by the gurus. The teacher were called as guru, the teacher who was giving the education. And this system of education was quite flexible. Why it was flexible? Because it has all the flexibility which you don't see today. First thing is, there is no fixed fee. There was fee, but no fixed fee. There were no printed books at the time. No book, no copies. There is no separate school building. Okay, No benches, no chairs. People or the student will sit on the ground. There is no blackboard. All is vocal. All is maukhik. There is no separate classes. That is, if you see, one is 5-year-old, one is 10-year-old, one is 15-year-old. There is no separate class. They will all sit together. There is no roll call. There is no attendance system. No annual examination. No regular timetable was followed at that time. So the classes were generally held, say, under a banyan tree, bargat ke ped. Only below any tree, any big tree, the classes will take place. Or say some corner of a village shop or corner of a village temple, the classes will happen. Classes will commence. Sometimes Guru's home also will be there for holding the class. So the fee, as I said, it was no fixed fee. It depended totally on the income of the parents. If the income of the parents is higher, the kid has to pay more. If the kid is not having that kind of parent which are earning more, he has not to go give more money. And teaching was, as I said, it was mainly vocal or oral. Okay, and Guru would decide what he has to teach depending on the needs of the students, right? And as I said, one more thing, there is no separate class. That is, say we have 3 kids, one is 5-year, one is 10-year, one is 15-year. They will sit together in single class and they will learn together. Okay. So what he found, Mr. Adam, that this flexibility has various benefits according to the natives, according to the local needs. Most of them were the agriculturists, farmers, peasants, and low-wage worker. So what will happen? The harvest time when the crops are cut, at this time, in this season, the class or the school will stop functioning. The kids, say these 2 kids, will go back or go to their land and they will work their parents. At that time 10, 12 kids were there. Okay, not like today. So these people, these children will work with their parents, and once this harvesting time is over, they'll come back and again the school will commence or the classes will commence or the Pathshala will start. Okay, so that is how even the peasant family, poor kids, they could also study. This was the benefit of the flexibility of the system, right? This is a picture, and this was painted by a Dutch painter, a Holland, Netherlands painter, Francois Solwyn. Now he came to India in late 18th century, and he tried to depict he made various pictures. This is one of them. How the life was there at that time. New routines, new rules. What does it mean? When the education policy changed or was implemented, that is the Western education, the British wanted to apply it here. The Western education, I told you about the Pathshalas. William Adam found out around 20 lakh students in 1 lakh Bihar and Bengal Pathshalas they are studying. So I'm talking about mid 19th century. So at that time, company was interested and concerned only about the higher education. That is after 12th, you can say right now, today's education. So the higher education they were interested in. So they just allowed these local Pathshalas to function, to work the same way it was functioning since whichever time they started. No interference. But after 1854, the vernacular education, that is the education which is not English, other than English, it can be Sanskrit, Hindi, Arabic and the Persian, Farsi. So after 1854, they decided to improve them. Improve what? Vernacular education. For that, what they have to do? They have to impose certain routines, certain new timetables, certain rules they have devised, formulated. So they have to establish these rules, and also Regular inspection. Regular inspection they wanted to do here, to work out here. Okay. So this is what they wanted to implement. Now, because imposing rules, establishing rules, that is, whether the timetable is followed, the monthly reports, the 6 monthly reports, the regular inspections, that is, the rules they have devised, whether it is followed or not. So for that, what they did? They appointed whom? They didn't appoint the English people. They actually appointed for the Pathshalas the government pandits, pandais, the pujaris, the priests in India. Okay, they wanted that the start should be from the Indian pandits only. And one pandit, he was given certain task. Each of these pandits, they have to look after 4 to 5 schools. There are different types of work which the pandit has to work out. First, they have to visit the pathshalas, visit the schools, and they have to see what is the level and the standard of teaching there, and they have to improve if at all it is required. So they have to improve the standard of teaching along with submitting the periodic reports, monthly, tri-monthly, that is the quarter wise. And they also have to see that the timetable, because regular routine rules are being established, so the timetable are followed or not. And teaching were done on the basic of textbook, because textbooks are published here. So teaching has to be based on the textbook. And finally, the examination, that is the annual examination, is taking place on the regular basis. These are different work of the pandits which are being recruited, appointed for these pathshalas. And the students, what is expected from the student now? Student has to pay regular fees. Previously, what would happen? There was a flexible system. That is, the poor has to give less, the rich has to give higher amount. And the student has to attend regular classes. There should not be any break. And they have fixed the seats. They have to sit at the fixed seat. And also, the discipline has to be followed. That is, the basic rules are of discipline. So, pathshalas, PS I am writing, those pathshalas which actually accepted these rules, they abided the government rules, British government. Now, the government started giving money to them, grants to them, in order to, as a management. So, they give, if they are following their rules, they are giving money. But what happened to the other pathshalas? There were certain gurus, certain pathshalas, they don't want to follow these rules. Now it became very difficult for them to survive, because the other schools were getting grants, money from the government, but these pathshalas were not getting these aid or money from the government. So gradually they faded. That is how we don't get any pathshala kind of thing right now. So this is the one thing. There is another consequence, there is another result. That is, the previous system was quite flexible. That is, the student which is poor or coming from a very moderate or poor background, the fees is taken less. Second thing, the flexibility which comes in here is, see, sometimes people may pay the fees, but what about the harvest time? Most of the people were peasant and they were farmers. So the students which are the poor students, they have to go to the harvest time to their parents, but they were expected to have discipline and regular attendance. How can they do that? They have to go to the harvest season. So these poor people or poor students, they were not able to cope up with this non-flexible system. Okay, so regular attendance they cannot give. As I said, they have to be available in the harvest time, cutting of the crops. So that is how the British started thinking that these are indisciplined people, these are indisciplined students, and they don't have any desire to learn. But the problem was different. The only thing was they were poor, they have to go to in the harvest time. Now coming to these two very important people, One is Mahatma Gandhi, the other is Rabindranath Tagore, called as Rabindranath Tagore. So the British, not only the British, they were thinking about the education. Not only the British officials, they were doing things, say steps, or say modulating new features for this education. There were other thinkers also. So early 19th century, around 1800, there were many thinkers who were interested in the education part. They wanted that the education has to be spread wider, because all these kids, they are not getting enough education. They were also trying to tell these British people, that is the Western education, they wanted to modernize India, and they requested the British to open more schools, college and universities, and put some more money in the education. But there are certain other Indians like Mahatma Gandhi, Rabindranath Tagore, and all others. They were purely against the Western education. They were against the British education, the way they were imparting or trying to implement that education. These Mahatma Gandhi and Rabindranath Tagore, they were against this Western education. So let us see what are their ideas, what they were saying against and for. Because this Rabindranath Tagore, he is a Nobel laureate, and Mahatma Gandhi, he is Mahatma, he is the father of the nation. Okay. So let us start with Mahatma Gandhi's idea. Mahatma Gandhi, he said, English education has enslaved us. They have made us slave. Mahatma Gandhi simply he suggested that the colonial education is creating a sense of inferiority in the minds of Indians. That is, the education which is imparted, the people have started thinking that we are inferior to the white people. That is, first, because they were thinking inferior, so they were thinking the Western civilization as superior. So the pride, the respect, the honor they should have for their own culture, it is being destroyed by this education. So basically what this Western education has done, it has poisoned the minds of the individuals. This Western education, it's clearly written here, poison. So, you can see the extent Mahatma Gandhi was saying it is a poison to the Indian people, this education. See, these all Indians have become slave. So this education has enslaved Indians. Whatever thing, stuff or anything is coming from the Western side, these enslaved Indians are appreciating it. Rather than appreciating the Indian stuff, they're admiring the Western stuff. So there are people who have started believing that British rule is good because of this education. So Gandhiji wanted a kind of education where Indians can recover from all these poison, and they can have a sense of dignity, self-respect, pride and honor for their culture, for what they have and what they have been in the past. So they urged the students, just leave all these education institutions which are providing these Western education, and just show these British that we don't want to be slave anymore. We want freedom. We want to be ourselves. We want to be Indians. Okay? We cannot be enslaved more, because we have been slave for this British for more than 200 years. Okay? Now, Gandhiji, he felt that the languages should be Indian. The medium of teaching has to be Indian language. It can be any language. It can be Gujarati, it can be Hindi, it can be Sanskrit. So the English has actually crippled Indians. English is just a language. It's just a way of expressing yourself. So you cannot have the English to put all this culture thing on the Indians, because this English has made the Indians stranger in their own land. Now these are behaving like Westerners, the Indians now. Gandhiji also said Western education is only about reading and writing. They are focusing on reading and writing. That is, the previous oral knowledge, the previous concept, the previous way of teaching was better. People are just reading the books, completing the textbook, They are not having any live experience, actual experience, working on the actual what is written in the book. So they are not having any practical knowledge. So education by Gandhiji, that is, it has to develop mind and soul. Everything has to be developed. So literacy, that is just learning certain language, reading or writing, is not an education. Is not education. Education is basically when people work with their hand, they learn a craft, some hunar they have, that is, some employability skills they develop, some management skill they develop, certain skills which they will only develop when they actually work. They have experience when they have practical knowledge. Okay? So in order to develop their mind, they need to have all the practical knowledge. So here we have both of them, Mahatma Gandhi, here Kasturba Gandhi, the wife of Mahatma Gandhi ji, and then all these. Here this is the Shanti Niketan. Shanti Niketan, these are the women who are studying in the Shanti Niketan, and this is Rabindranath Tagore or Thakur, and this is the picture of 1940, right? Now we talked about Gandhiji's idea. Now let us come to the Rabindranath Tagore's or Thakur's idea of education. So before that, let me take you to this place. This is Kolkata, and this is the marker which is showing the place where Shanti Niketan is. Okay, this is the Shanti Niketan picture, and if you see, it's a very picturesque, natural kind of ambience. Trees, birds, open, everything is natural. There is no building, there is no concrete, there is no blackboard, there is no say physical things which have come up or man-made things. Everything is natural. So Shanti Niketan is a neighborhood of Bolpur city. This is basically a Bolpur subdivision of a district which is Birbhum. So you can say that Shanti Niketan is in Birbhum district in West Bengal. So it's near the Bolpur city, and it is in a rural setting. Rural. It's around 152 kilometers, which I got when I was researching. But in your book, it is written as 100 kilometers. So let us go with the book. So Shanti Niketan, we all know. Now this is a very important, and people go to see it, tour these places where Rabindranath Tagore actually started all these very precious things. Now Rabindranath Tagore, he started the institution in 1901. When he was a kid, when he was a child. Now Tagore, he hated going to school. He got suffocated. He thinks that everything is so oppressive, that the teachers are oppressive, the conditions are oppressive. It's like he is living in a jail. He is in a prison. And whatever he wanted to do, he cannot do it. He was forced to do something which he never wanted to do. So his mind was always outside the classroom. So always remember, the mid bencher and the last bencher, they always succeed, which I have seen in my life. The front benchers, they are, but the others, they prosper. I don't know why. So now Rabindranath Tagore, he wanted to set up a school where the kid or the child becomes happy. He is free. He is creative. Whatever he has inside him, it can be flourished, it can be improved, it can be emancipated, developed. That is, whatever thoughts and desire a kid has, there we need to provide him with an environment for doing this. So these are the way of thinking of Mr. Tagore. Okay. So what happened here? He said that this childhood is a time of self-learning. That is, we cannot pressurize them. We cannot be rigid. So we cannot discipline them, restricting the discipline. So teachers they are responsible that whichever is the child, the teacher need to enhance this imagination of the child, understand the child, and help him to develop his or her curiosity. Because child is always curious. He wants to learn. So don't pressurize it. don't put him in under the cage of this discipline. So he said that the existing school is actually killing the desire of the child. A child can always be creative. So as I said, 100 kilometers from Calcutta, it's around 100 kilometers, and in the rural setting, that is the village setting, you can say this school is in countryside. So 100 kilometers, I was saying 152 is given in the Google, so whichever you take. Okay. And this is the place, this is the abode of peace. Shanti Niketan means abode of peace. A place where Shanti is there, peace is there. And people live and the kids live and they study in the nature. And now children and the kids and other big ones also, they can cultivate their natural creativity. It can be singing a song, it can be writing, it can be some sculpture. Now, Tagore and Gandhiji, they have different ideas. Gandhiji was saying that Western civilization is a big no-no. He was highly critical about this Western civilization. He was not of the idea of machines and technology. Okay? He said whatever is coming from outside, it's a big no-no for me. But Tagore has different thoughts. He said whatever is coming from outside, Western civilization, machines, technology, we have to combine this with the Indian tradition. That is, let us have Indian tradition along with the foreign good things. So he was not only teaching the culture, he was not teaching the Sanskrit or Hindi, Bangla. He was also teaching the science, technology, all the kind of art, science and music and dance. So it was a combined way of imbibing or say corroborating the Western and Indian culture. This is the idea of Tagore. So many individuals and thinkers say some wanted that this British system is good, we have to enhance the British system. There are other people who wanted some alternate system. Some people who wanted to keep this Indian culture. They wanted to show the Rashtravad and the nationalism. So they wanted to be truly national. Some were of other thought that Western is good and let's combine Western and Indian tradition. So there were different thinkers. We cannot have one of them. So let me give you an example of Indian people. You know Google, you know Microsoft, you know Indians are heading these two big giant industries or the software firms. Now I want you to name me. Name the CEO of Google and Microsoft right now. And let me tell you, they are Indians. So that is how Indian minds are. Indian minds are best all over the world. But the only thing is, we have to give them a chance. Okay? This is the Shanti Niketan place I am showing. One more picture I will show you. This is the picture. This is a picture of missionary school in Coimbatore. This is early 20th century I am talking about. So there are different Christian missionary school came, and if you go to cities today also, the Christian schools are always considered to be good. The way of education they impart and whatever happened is history. Let me tell you about Thomas Arnold. So I'm not talking about India. I'm talking about Britain. So before this Education Act in 1870, there was no widespread education. There was child labor, there were poor children. So it was very difficult to survive the family because the children were important. So the school were after coming, it will come after, because first we have to feed. So when this compulsory school education was introduced, Thomas Arnold, he was the headmaster of a private school which was called as Rugby. Now he gave very good ideas. This curriculum of the school was having the Greek and Roman classics. And he said that the past is also very important to make the future. That is, Arnold felt that study of classic discipline the mind of the kids. He was saying that the kids are normally savage. They are uncultured. They are uncivilized kids. So we need to control them. We need to tell them, if we want them to be civilized adult, we need to tell them that what is right and wrong in the society, in the community. That is, we have to tell them what is your proper and improper behavior. So education is not only disciplining the mind, it is disciplining being the behavior and mind together. That is what Thomas Arnold said. So he advised about the past, they will give the idea, and we need to give this to our kids who need to be good people in the society when they grow. Thomas Arnold. Okay, this is all about this topic. Thank you so much. Take care of yourself.